And the thing about anger is that until you come across meditation or until you come across these teachings, most people, they don't notice anger in a sense. And what I mean by that is that most people become angry. They're being angry, right? And once that bridge is crossed, it's over until the consequences come, right? Because once that bridge is crossed, you and the anger are the same thing. Right? You ever notice when you're angry, that you feel angry, you're being angry, you're speaking angry, you're acting angry. So it's the energy of anger is in charge. So obviously the first thing that you have to do is you have to notice, right? And that's why I've been saying here that the informal practice of meditation is noticing when you're in your life and you're dealing with things and circumstances are happening and challenges are coming at you in life. Informal practice means to pay attention in such a way where you notice mental states, you notice emotional states when they arise, especially anger and annoyance, because that's where we get ourselves into trouble, in our relationships and so forth. And so when you notice, so the first thing is to notice, and when you notice, the second thing is to be aware of the thoughts and emotions without identifying with them. That's the distinction. If anger is occurring and I am not angry, anger is occurring, but I am not angry, right? I am aware of anger. I am witnessing anger, right? Now there's space. When I am being the anger, there's no space. Me and the anger are the same thing. When I'm aware of the anger and aware of angry thoughts, then I am not identified with the anger, and that gives me some space, and that space that it gives me opens up the opportunity for other possibilities other than me, because if I'm being the anger, all I can do is be angry. All I can do is speak anger, right? And then, of course, what we do is we bring we bring whatever our wherewithal is, our intellectual wherewithal, or, into play. So now, and it's interesting when you think about it, right? Because this all happens in nanoseconds, right? But it's how a war starts, right? So you become angry, and then you have your arsenal of anger to use, right? In terms of the things you say when you're angry, the things you do when you're angry, and so they all come up to be ready to use. Everything's on, nuclear on alert, right? And then the other person brings their arsenal up. This is all happening in the brain, in the mind, right? And then the exchange starts, right? They say what they say, then you counter it, then it's aggressive, then it's passive, back and forth, right? Like that. And if that doesn't get interrupted somehow, and it escalates, then it can become a physical war between two people. A lot of time it doesn't. A lot of time it doesn't become physical. It's just a skirmish. Right, a few shots, a few punches back and forth, right, and then you carry on. But we don't look at it that way. You know what I mean? When you identify with the anger, you're not looking at it the way I just described it. No, when you identify with the anger, you're interested in the news media for your country. Reports the incident, right? So you talk to somebody else about what happened. That's like the news media reporting the incident. And when the news media reports the incident, it's biased. You're telling your story about what happened, right? And then they have their story about what happened, right? This is all of the unworkability of when emotions arise and you'll completely identify with the emotions and you don't notice the shift when you shift into being the emotion, and then the emotion happens, and then you act it out and you come into conflict. And then many times after the conflict is over, depending upon who it was with and how bad it got, right? Then there's the consequences, the damage that was done. And then, often what happens after that is then the same one that got angry, identified with the anger, turns on you, the one that got angry, after it's over. Like, oh, you're such a jerk, look what you did, and So that's how it goes, right? And it's all automatic. It's all automatic. Once the operation goes, it's just like they say in regard to nuclear war, right? The problem with nuclear war is that once it starts, it can't be stopped. Once the missiles are in the air, then the other country has to fire their missiles, and then there's enough stuff in the air to kill everybody, right? So, and the thing about it is, it's an automatic thing. Once one button gets pushed, the whole thing can't be stopped, right? The same thing is true with anger when you don't notice you're angry. Once the button gets pushed, it has to play through. The whole thing has to play through. And it's interesting. It's interesting because the outer world is an expression of the inner world. That's why the Dalai Lama says war starts with us as individuals. In our inner worlds, there's wars. There's war all the time, but we don't pay attention to that. We justify it. We have it to be. We try and understand it as something that is acceptable or rational, right? When in fact it's never rational. The other day I came across on internet. Now on YouTube. Now they're posting a lot of YouTubes about weapons now. It's interesting, because of what's going on. They had a submarine on there that had, I think, 12 or 13 silos. One submarine, right? And it said that this submarine carries enough nuclear weapons to destroy China and Russia. One submarine. So, and then they have these bombers now that cost billions of dollars, right? And so when you look at the money that's being spent on defense, right? That money could feed the world. That money could feed the world over and over again. I mean, the degree, the extent to which the money is being spent on weaponry is a ridiculous percentage of the national money that we have. And now what's happening in Europe, right, is all the countries that border Russia have increased their defense budgets, by 20 or 30%. So just we're going to make more weapons now, right? So when you start to look at all the details of these things, and then when you consider who the leaders are that we're depending upon, you better practice harder. You better practice more meditation, right? Because given the direction the world is going in right now, being a physical body is not a good idea. And so part of these teachings are that we can realize ourselves to be a spiritual body. We can realize ourselves to be a non-physical entity. And the sooner the better, given the way things are going, right? Because it may come... What's that?
We're going to get there sooner, being a non-physical entity.
Yeah, but...
With all the bombs.
Right, but if you don't do the work, right, when the body goes, right, you won't be prepared to make the transition. You find yourself dealing with still getting caught up in the way people around you are behaving, right? And then, so that's one part of it that's negative, right? And then the next part of it that's negative is then you beat yourself up for not being more spiritual. So again, that's why peace begins at home. And the practice of peace begins at home. And the things that you're talking about, yeah, that's in a sense why we're here. Do you know what I mean? We want to be able to take advantage of these possibilities that these teachings tell us exist, that these practices tell us exist. But in order to take advantage of these possibilities, you have to go through a transitional period, in which the way your brain and mind operates is still engaged, right? So now you're learning to meditate, you're learning to be peaceful, you're learning what it means, to be able to experience yourself as a spiritual being, and what that has to offer, and how that can progress and become a way of being that's consistent in your life, right? But that process, from the time you first hear about this stuff till the time comes when you're consistently grounded in it, right? So that you can be peaceful. So between the beginning of coming in contact with this and the time when that happens, you have to tolerate having one foot in and one foot out. You have to tolerate falling back into your patterns, have to tolerate making mistakes, right? But the key to that not affecting the process, right, is to accept that that's part of the process. The key to that not affecting the process is to accept that that's part of the process. And near the end of that process, in many cases, there's what they call the dark night of the soul. In other words, it keeps getting worse. It keeps getting worse. Because this process of waking up, is one in which it begins with the person, right? Then the person starts to learn and understand concepts and do the practices, right? Now, you have to understand that that as much as you would not like it, would prefer that it not be the case, it's nonetheless the case that the person is doing this practice and the person is developing these understandings to become awakened as a spiritual person. That's what happens. But what happens is as this process continues, right, and all along you know that fundamental to the teaching and practices is to experience yourself not as a person. Right? So when as this process continues, especially if you get more involved with it, right, and practice more and study more and learn more, right, pressure starts to build, right, because the existence of you as a person now is in conflict with itself. Okay, the person wants to be enlightened. It's a dilemma. The person wants to be enlightened, which means not to be a person. It's a dilemma, right? And so you start to experience this pressure because you feel like there's still enough of you that's in the being of the person or the personality, right? That keeps being operational. And at the very same time you're doing that, you're starting to be aware of how counterproductive it is. In other words, you're literally blocking yourself, and you can't help it. Right? And you start to feel desperate about it, like what's going on? Will I ever get out of this? And so forth and so on, right? So there comes a period where pressure builds up and it feels like you're going crazy, maybe even, right? Or it feels like you can't stand this anymore. You may want to just forget this whole thing and go bowling or something, But the reality of it is that's evidence that you're actually closer to the experience of the breakthrough. And the breakthrough is when the house of cards falls. If you listen to a lot of spiritual teachers talk about when that happened for them, how that happened for them, right? Sometimes it happens because of external circumstances. Like you get fired from your job after you worked 30 years and lost your pension. Right? Or somebody very close to you dies, or you get a diagnosis, terminal diagnosis, or, sometimes the pressure comes from outside that kind of forces the issue, right? But other times the pressure comes from inside, from the person simply coming in contact with these teachings and practices and wanting to experience the possibility that they make available to us. So I think if you understand this, it gives you kind of a way of relating to the process that can make it a little easier. That's one of the reasons to have a teacher to talk to have somebody to talk to, right? And it's the reason why you may be in a place in your process where you feel like you're going nuts, right? And you feel like you're more anxious than you ever were, you're more depressed than you ever were, you're confused. And you go to your teacher and you report all this and you say, what do I do? What does all this mean, right? And the teacher says, very good, very good. And then, you may get pissed off at the teacher, right? But the teacher's seeing that you're making progress, right? It doesn't look like progress to you, right? But you have to go through that. This is the death of the personality, right? And the personality is not going to let go just because you have a concept, you have these intellectual concepts about freedom. No, it's not going to let go like that. It's a program, and the program is designed to maintain itself and survive. Your brain is designed to maintain itself and survive, right? And so you could say that this whole process of waking up spiritually, right? Eventually you will come into conflict with your own organism. Eventually you will come into conflict with your own brain and your own mind, right? And that's a difficult process, right? Because this brain and mind has a program that's been running for years and years and years, right? And one of the ways the personality maintains itself is to continually justify itself. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's winning or failing. If it wins, it's proud of itself. If it fails, it justifies itself. So that keeps the personality going all along, right? But now you come into this process where you come to understand that unless that program is interrupted, unless that's replaced, right, it'll continue to operate in such a way that happiness, well-being, and satisfaction will not be part of your future. Because the program is the program. The program can only run what the program does. You can't go to a Coke machine and put your money in and expect to get a bottle of water. It ain't going to happen. The same thing is true with the brain. It's a stimulus response mechanism, and it's changing and adapting only if the input that's coming to it is different from what's already running, and that different programming persists in time until it replaces the programming that existed before. You could really study meditation these days strictly from a brain science perspective. Right? Because in reality, that's exactly what we're doing when you're practicing meditation. Is you're being aware of the programming when it runs, right? And then you're withdrawing the energy from the program when you see that the program is antiquated. You know, like one of the things that the Dalai Lama said recently is he said his response to the war is he said, it's as simple as this: war is outdated. It's as simple as this: war is outdated, right? Because we're far enough along as humankind, right, to understand that nobody wins wars, right? That we're hurting ourselves as human beings, right? And I don't know about you, but I think that consciousness is more so now than it has been in the past. You know, you can see now there's kind of an international negative reaction to the idea of there being a war. It doesn't matter who's at war, just the idea that there being a war. That's the way that you and I need to relate to our own government. See, this is your government, right? This is how you and I need to relate to our own government and to our own internal leadership, right? Because our own internal leadership, whether that is some figure that you follow or that's some idealistic notion you have about who you are, you know, you have to be willing to take the lead in your own life. You have to be willing to lead your life, meaning that you stop having your life be a design and be an educational reality that came from your conditioning in the outside world. And you start to take responsibility for your behavior, for your experience, for whether you're happy, whether you're satisfied. You start to take responsibility for that instead of being dependent on the outside world, you know, to fix you or to get you straightened out so you can have a better quality of life. You take responsibility for that. That means that you lead your own life. You're the leader of your life. It's no longer being led by these outdated religious beliefs, right? It's no longer being run by that. It's no longer being run by these outdated political ideas, right? Because one thing is for sure, unless you really have your head up your ass, which most of us do, by the way. But one thing is for sure, one of my old teachers used to say, a person who thinks they're very intelligent and they got all the answers, right? And they think they're enlightened, right? But they have their head up their ass, and my teacher used to say they have a well-lit asshole. This is like learning how to do mental aikido or mental judo with your own mind, right? You don't stop it. You just pay attention to it, right? You pay attention to it, and out of paying attention to it, you're recognizing in real time as it's running, right, that it's not appropriate, that it's not a good fit for what you're up to, right? If you want to be happy and satisfied, right? So you're watching it run, right? But you're not identifying with it. You're watching it run, but you're no longer considering it to be you, consider it to be your thinking and your mind, right? No, it's just a mind and a thinking that got produced through conditioning. But if the way you're watching them is such that you're not identified with them, in other words, I am not thinking these thoughts, I am not having these feelings, as long as you're identified with it that way, right, it becomes possible to withdraw your energy from it, right? And when you withdraw your energy from it, it can't continue to happen because the energy that it's using to happen is coming from you. Do you understand? So first of all, don't try and stop it. Secondly, and it's interesting because secondly, the process for having it come to an end is meditation. When you're practicing formal meditation, you're practicing experiencing the space of conscious awareness. You're practicing experiencing the space of conscious awareness that's available to you rather than thinking about things all the time. So when you move attention from the thinking activity to the awareness of the body breathing, there's a space of consciousness there. That's why I say when you do that, please become familiar with the experience of that space of consciousness. That space of consciousness is not, it's not full of thought. It's not full of thinking activity, right? It's space, right? There's space there of consciousness. And the awareness is there, being aware of the body breathing. And if during that time you become more and more familiar with that experience, okay, that becomes a place that you visit that you can now identify and recognize and go to through your will. Go to. So when you're in, and of course you've got to practice formal meditation for a while until this is available to you, right? But at some point it becomes available, and in your everyday life when you're under the gun, right, you're familiar with this space of awareness, and you can simply, as a matter of will, go to it. So when you're confronted in a situation where you notice that emotions are coming up, thoughts are coming up, right, and you recognize that you're in a state, you're in a reactive state, right? You recognize that, right? That you go to the space of awareness. You become the space in which it's happening instead of the content. That's the shift. You become the space in which it's happening. So now you're aware of the thoughts, you're aware of the physical sensations, you're aware of the feelings. That's happening in a conscious space of awareness. And because you have space, there are also possibilities and opportunities for action outside of the reaction. Outside of the reaction. See, if you are in a situation where you notice that you're in a reaction, right? Then that becomes part of the process. I notice I'm in a reaction, so what do? Well, I do the same thing I do when I practice meditation, right? I pay attention to my body. I notice the tension there. I notice the energy level there if it's anger, right? I notice the thoughts that are playing in my mind, right? But you see, when I say I notice those things, I can see those things because there's more space, because of the awareness that is available to me because of the practice that I've been doing. It's as simple as that. If the ego's asking me, how do I get out of this, right? That's the problem. That's the problem. And you could easily miss the problem, right? Because if your ego, right, if your ego identifies with her ego, right, then you're on the same level, right? And you wouldn't even hear what I just said. You wouldn't even notice that this is an egotistical expression. And that's the problem. But you see, the ego is complaining and asking for guidance, but only on its terms. Do you understand? Only on its terms. I will have a conversation with you. I will ask questions. I will accept your guidance as an ego and as a way of using what you tell me to be in control and change what's happening. When I look at that, what I see, like you just said, is a person or a personality attempting to be spiritual. Attempting to be spiritual. And that will go on until it's done going on. That'll go on until it builds to a crescendo, until it becomes frustrating and desperate, right? And sometimes when that happens, the seeker gets pissed, right? They get pissed at the teacher, you know. Something's wrong. You must not be telling me everything. You're holding back, right? What's the secret? You know, what's the secret? You know, that doesn't help. That doesn't help. Don't tell me that.